Welcome to the LRQA Supply Chain video podcast series with Professor Richard Wilding, one of the world's leading supply chain experts. This episode is the first in a series which covers the key elements of global supply chain strategy.
Hello, I'm Professor Richard Wilding. I'm Professor of Supply Chain Management at Cranfield School of Management. Cranfield School of Management is one of the top European business schools. And at Cranfield, our whole philosophy is about getting knowledge into practice. World-class supply chain management requires quite a few foundational principles. First of all, I think the key thing is an understanding of the time dimension of the supply chain. Most of the time we're having to compete through time, not through cost, Cost is an element, but at the end of the day, time is a more important dimension that we're having to deal with in many markets. That starts to gain transparency for us, transparency of what's actually going on. And when we have transparency and people can see what's going on, they actually trust that things are going to happen. And then trust is this other foundational principle. So I talk about the 3 T's: time, transparency, and trust. The misconceptions about supply chain management have often led supply chain management to be relegated as a sort of a sub-function within the boardroom. The key thing to recognise nowadays is that we have to be able to get supply chain management onto the boardroom agenda. So what are the things that can wake up the board to wanting to understand supply chain management? I think one of the most interesting bits of research recently has been undertaken in the United States, where they looked at supply chain glitches. In other words, where problems occurred in the supply chain. And they linked this to the share price of the business. And one of the things that they found was that if a problem occurred in a supply chain, up to 20% of the share value of an organisation could be written off. This really does mean that supply chain management is a boardroom agenda. If we're not actually ensuring that our supply chains are managed correctly, this is going to have a big impact on the boardroom. If I had one piece of advice that I would want to give to somebody on what to think about in terms of their supply chain, I think the number one thing is going to be transparency. Now, what do I mean by transparency? What I mean by this is being able to make your business so that people can see what is actually going on within the business processes. Transparency, to some degree, is getting your supply chain on one piece of paper. It's also knowing where a product is at any particular point of time as it moves through the supply chain. We have technology to enable us to do this, but this should be a key focus. Now, why do we want transparency? Because lack of transparency leads to responses like, well, I need that product or that service for the end of next week, but I'll ask for it on Monday instead, just in case they're late. Why do people do that? They do that because they don't have transparency, and therefore they do not trust that the transaction is going to take place. So by having transparency within the supply chain, we're then able to build trust. And when we can build trust, we can build better customer relationships and supplier relationships, and therefore we can move forward and we can really gain competitive advantage for our organisation.
Thank you for watching the LRQA Supply Chain video podcast series. To download any of the episodes, visit www.lrqa.com.